It had been a long time since I last saw Total Recall, and ironically I couldn't remember much about it. I first watched this movie when I was back in school, and although the intricacies of the plot had faded, much of the imagery had stayed with me. The sight of Quaid's eyes bulging in Mars's hostile atmosphere still haunts me to this very day.
You know, whenever you do a film that is like a futuristic film with Mars and with blue screen shooting and special effects like this, they cost a lot of money. And we saved around $10-12 million by doing it in Mexico. And it is still that the movie was like $48 or $50 million the way it was. You know, it was very expensive. But Mexico is a wonderful place to shoot. You know, it's really, they're very cooperative. They help you every way they can. And it has that futuristic look, certain buildings in Mexico City, which we needed because our film takes place 2084. So we needed a real futuristic look.
For those who don't know, Total Recall is the adaptation of a Philip K. Dick story. We can remember it for You Wholesale, which I must confess I have not read, so I don't know how close it sticks to the original text. But it might be interesting to note that the source material credit on the movie says inspired by rather than based on.
When I purchased my first published story, somebody said to me, "Do you read that kind of stuff?" And I said, "Madam, I not only read it, I write it." And people would say to me, "Well, why don't you write something serious? Why do you write science fiction? Write something serious." By that, they meant important. Nevertheless, I did it as well as I could. I wrote the most profound, the most imaginative novel I could, and just floated it out into the world and hoped that eventually it would receive an audience. But there is a considerable difference between the French interest in science fiction and the American interest.
When the movie was still in the development stage, it was offered to Canadian filmmaker David Cronenberg.
I had done some work with Dino De Laurentiis, and he at that point was going to do Total Recall. I was very excited to do that, and I wrote several versions of this, I think 12 drafts of Total Recall. At a certain point, Ronald Shusett said to me, "Well, you know what you've done. You've written the Philip K. Dick version." I said, "Well, I thought that's what we were supposed to do. It is based on a Philip K. Dick story. I love Philip Dick. That's what I thought we were doing." He said, "No, we want this movie to be like Raiders of the Lost Ark Go to Mars." I said, "Well, okay, I'm not doing that movie." So I said goodbye.
The project would eventually end up in the hands of the Dutch filmmaker Paul Verhoeven, who was then riding high from the success of RoboCop.
I remember exactly, I was sitting on the couch like this in Los Angeles. We only had an apartment at that time. And I was reading all these scripts that came in. And I was reading it and throwing it away, reading it and throwing it away. And then finally I remember it exactly this by special courier. This script came, Total Recall, and I started to read it, and they had said, "Well, if you like it, you have to let us know in 3 hours, and then we are going to introduce you to Arnold Schwarzenegger, because whatever you think, he is going to play it."
And if your goal is to make Raiders of the Lost Ark Goes to Mars, I can't think of many people better qualified than Verhoeven. In the film, Arnold Schwarzenegger plays Douglas Quaid, an industrial worker who is haunted by dreams of Mars, a planet to his mind he's never visited. He goes to a company which provides memory implants to save you reading a book or learning a skill, or in this case, going on a vacation you can't afford. And it turns out that he is a repeat customer, and what he thought was his life was merely an implant.
I was very much aware that it should be light. If I would make it too serious, I don't think people would believe it is Arnold. Then you should have somebody like Colin Farrell, or like they had in the past, Richard Dreyfuss, or Patrick Swayze. That's more normal, isn't it? Harrison Ford, of course, in Blade Runner is serious, isn't it? There's no funniness there. There's no jokes there. There's no lightness. It's a pretty dark movie, in fact. And I felt that with Arnold that could not be.
This is a pulp science fiction novel on the big screen, and it revels in that. It's big, it's bright, and it's over the top. Let's just look at the special effects for a moment, which are largely done practically, with a mix of facial prosthetics, miniatures, stop motion animation, and puppets.
The makeup job in a movie with the people in there, it's the most extraordinary makeup that you've seen. I mean, just not the three breasts alone, but the way the way that you see the mutants and the various different characters that you see in a film is absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's really incredible. I think which adds a lot to the picture.
Because the effects are physical rather than computer generated, and because they're stylized rather than realistic, for the most part they have aged incredibly well. This iconic scene where Quaid is revealed to be in disguise, the face coming apart and going back together again is animated so well that you almost don't notice the stop-motion Arnold Schwarzenegger looks more like the baby from Eraserhead. The movie's screen story is credited to the writers of the original Alien movie, Ronald Shusett and Dan O'Bannon, and the movie's producer, John Povell, with the original script being written by Shusett and O'Bannon and rewritten by Big Trouble in Little China writer Gary Goldman. And the first thing that even the casual viewer would note is the writing is considerably better than your usual Arnold Schwarzenegger vehicle of the time. In fact, with the exception of maybe True Lies, this might be the best written film that Arnold Schwarzenegger has ever been in. The characterizations are huge, almost cartoonish, but excellent. Schwarzenegger, which even if you love him you have to admit he gets by on charisma rather than acting skill, turns in a great performance. He could be a construction worker, or a secret agent, or possibly the bad guy. And he was praised for taking the role at the time. But the general feedback for the film was actually kind of mixed.
I like the first hour a lot. The picture starts out and has some really fabulous special effects. There's a thing where they go through a scanning device, like going through an airport X-ray detector, and the whole body is X-rayed. And the way that special effect is done is exciting. Once he gets to the Red Planet, I think the picture starts to resemble itself all the way through, which is it real, is it not real, and he's fighting this one guy.
The film, of course, found its audience, possibly due to a slightly younger demographic than could see it in the cinema, watching it on home video and latterly TV. And now it's looked back on, by my generation at least, as something of a classic. So, of course, the powers that be remade it. Not once, but twice. Firstly, just 9 years after the movie's release, a show called Total Recall 2070 was first broadcast on Canadian television. It's actually quite a handsome looking show, but doesn't have a great deal in common with the 1990 movie, apart from the memory implant service from which the show gets its title. The plot is different and so are all the characters. I haven't watched the whole series, so it would feel unfair for me to judge it, but at the time of recording, all 22 episodes of its one and only season can be found on YouTube, so you can judge it for yourself.
You don't have to tell me everything, but it would help.
Then, more notably, the film was remade in 2012, with Len Wiseman directing and Colin Farrell in the lead. There are many things in the remake that you could point at and reasonably argue are better than the original, but it falls down with one major difference. It's not as much fun.
Colin there was a tone and just a personality that when I read the short story in college, that the kind of Quaid that I remember from that story was very different from the Arnold version that I'd watched as a kid. And that always stayed with me. And then, I didn't really think about it. I went on and did what I did. And when this story came about, when I read the script, part of the thing that interested me about the script was that it reminded me of that kind of Quaid that I read when I was in college.
Let's just compare the photography for a moment. On the left we have the vivid colours of the original movie, and on the right we have the greys and blues of the remake. Which is fine, don't get me wrong, but it makes for rather a generic dystopia. The production design of the remake is a mishmash of different cultures with neon lights. It's clear that the filmmaker is more influenced by another Philip K. Dick story, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is better known by the movie adaptation's title, Blade Runner.
Who are you?
Dr. Edgemar from Recall.
How did you find me?
It's a little difficult to explain. Could you open the door, please? I'm unarmed.
This is my favourite scene from the original movie, and I wouldn't be surprised if it had some influence on the creation of The Matrix almost 10 years later. In it, a mysterious man appears at the apartment door and claims Quaid is not really experiencing the events of the movie. He is in fact on a slab at Recall, and this is all a dream. The man in the suit has been implanted into his head to talk him out of the delusion. He even produces the woman Quaid thought was his wife to talk him down, and for a moment he's convinced. He's told to take a pill which will cause him to wake up in the real world.
Hey, what are you doing here?
They sent me in for you.
The version as presented in the remake has a slightly different dynamic. Instead of an unknown man in a suit who may or may not be trustworthy, he is confronted by his workmate, Harry, who informs Quaid that he is stuck in the machine at recall and he's there to talk him out. But rather than dropping a pill and waking up in the real world, he is told to shoot Melina. Now, taking a pill and shooting your love interest have very different what if I'm wrong consequences, and I don't buy anyone even contemplating risking the latter.
If you're really playing the part of, trying to sell that this is fake.
Right.
This guy's coming in casually going, interesting.
Check this stuff. Wow.
Interesting.
Love that.
One change I really appreciated was to the scene where Quaid is in disguise. This woman walks on screen and suddenly anyone who's seen the original film knows where the protagonist is hiding. Only he isn't. That is a smart rug pull, and I'm here for it.
In the end, the problem is Len Wiseman is no Paul Verhoeven. There are reasons why this is closer to the story, what the original script would have been because of the casting of Colin Farrell. But it did feel, oddly enough, particularly unmemorable. It's not terrible. The lift is silly. But it's not terrible, but it is very, very forgettable, which is ironic considering the subject title.
I think Mark Kermode is being a bit harsh. The film's biggest problem is that it comes after the Schwarzenegger movie, and if you've seen both you are forced to compare them, and the original is better. If we lived in a world where that film didn't exist, then the Len Wiseman film would probably be held in high regard. But then I guess you could say that about every derivative work.
Anyway, congratulations. This film is like the real hit of the summer, isn't it?
$100 million.
Man, well, good for you. Now,
Well, not for me.
Well, no, but I mean the success of the film, sure, and that means that they'll think, well, get her. She was in that big film, and you continue to be in good movies.
It has been an incredible treat refamiliarising myself with this movie, and I now long for a time when a film being described as big, fun and full of action doesn't automatically mean stupid.
It's a very interesting and a very hip story and a hip movie, and like a lot of the critics say, it's a roller coaster ride from the beginning to the end. It's like Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Batman all in one movie, and that's exactly what it is, and that's why there's such an excitement all over the country about this movie.
What'd you think of that film? Well, I really enjoyed it. I had my brain stolen a couple of years ago, so I can really relate to the Arnold character.
I would like to thank the powers that be at Squabblebox for asking me back for another guest video. This is my 4th one for them, so if you like this, why not check out those? And if that leaves you thirsty for more, you can pop over to my channel where I talk about slightly less mainstream films. I'm Scott Kingsnorth, and I'm making a movie.